Okay. The last year we spoke about, we finished in the middle of Kuf Nun Ches. I did not have a chance, things that were not in my control to continue giving shurim on the end of Kuf Nun Ches and Kuf Nun Tes and Kuf Samach. And being that the Koil is already holding in Kuf Samach Aleph, Kuf Samach Beis, so I am going to jump to Kuf Samach Aleph. Kuf Samach Aleph, and today I'm not going to get to Kuf Samach Beis, but that's going to be the next year. Today we're going to talk about Kuf Samach Aleph. Kuf Samach Aleph is essentially a new topic. Kuf Nun Zayin through Kuf Samach is Chalukas Karka when it comes to Shutfim, whether it is Shutfim Bekarka, whether how to divide, how to separate to prevent Hezekriya. And here in Kuf Samach Aleph through Kuf Samach Gimel, we'll call it a subtopic within the dinim of Niskei Shchenim, within the dinim of Shutfim Bekarka, and that is the responsibilities of one to another. Kuf Samach Aleph, Kuf Samach Beis is, which is in the Seder of the Koil, is the responsibilities of people within their, if they're within the Chatzar, within the Mavoi. Kuf Samach Gimel, the responsibilities of people in the city. I did not put that Kuf Samach Gimel into the Seder of the Limud. It's a long siman. Most of it is irrelevant in America, even though it's very relevant in Eretz Yisrael. There is one or two topics which I might mention, but if you already went ahead in the schedule of Koilel and you have time, Kuf Samach Gimel is a Geshmak siman, even though it's not in the Seder of Koilel. Start Kuf Samach Aleph. Now, Kuf Samach Aleph is a very Yesodistic siman that, despite the fact it's a very small one in Shulchan Aruch, the majority of, not the majority, but a big bulk of issues between neighbors in condo buildings or in bungalow colonies, they are very dependent on this siman, in addition to certain things we already learned in previous simanim. So, and there's a lot of the Heintige Poskim deal with this. There are books that were written, full books that were written on these simanim, because a lot of things are coming out of the simanim, b'chlal, and some of the books that we have downstairs, some of the books I wasn't able to get a hold of, but we'll still mention them. And there are Neitzar Chachma, whatever it is, Hebrew books, and you'll be able to find them. Let's start with Siman Kuf Samach Aleph. Now it's very important to remember that this Siman, as all the other Siman in Shulchan Aruch, these things are based on coming straight out of the Gemara, as you see in the Beis Yosef, and things change with time due to Minhag Amokim, due to the Malchus, etc. And it's important to also remember that even when you have a Minhag, even when you have Dinah de Malchusa, if it's something which is directly against Torah, which is Moitzi Mammon Shalei Kadin from somebody, then you paskin according to Shulchan Aruch. There's no place that you could paskin according to Dinah de Malchusa to be Moitzi Mammon Shalei Kadin from somebody. And that comes into play specifically in this siman more than in other simanim, because this siman goes into discussions of financial responsibilities of one neighbor to the other neighbor when they are in a shared property. We'll start with Kuf Samach Aleph, Sifim, Aleph, and Beis, and then Aleph and Beis we're going to discuss together. Then we'll go to Gimel, and Weiter. If people are living together in a Chatzar, they could force each other to build a door and a lock and a base shar. A base shar is a guardhouse, and any other thing which is a tzorech gadol for the chatzar, or if it's minhag hamedina to do it in the chatzar. But something which is extras, which is not tzorech gadol, for example, there's a tziur v'chiyur, and it's the Prisha corrects it to siyud. Siyud is plastering. Tziur is certain designs that they would make on these doorways. V'chulu. That's considered extras. Make it beautifying, but not a tzorech, and therefore one cannot be kai for the other ones to participate in those expenses. Whereas when it comes to expenses of tzorech gadol, you could force him. Now, if somebody has a house in the Chatzar and he does not live there, he has to participate in the door and in the lock, but not in the other things. That is essentially Sif Aleph and Beis, and the end of Sif Aleph also tells you, if one does something on his own accord, something which is not needed, and then afterwards the other people show that they're happy with what was done over there, he has to then, we go back and he participates in the expenses. The Erech HaShulchan, now just have in mind, there's the Erech HaShulchan, there's the Erech HaShulchan, there's the Erech Lechem. Erech HaShulchan is from Rav Tayyib from Tunisia. Erech HaShulchan you all know, from Russia, and the Erech Lechem is much earlier, it's from the Ma'arik, that is on the Shulchan Aruch. So the Erech HaShulchan is a set of 10 volumes on 9.5 on Choshen Mishpat and 1/2 on Even HaEzer. And it's quite geschmack. It goes into the same category as Knesset Agdola, Dvar HaMishpat, Yelaket Yosef, Mata Shimon. All those, I think I mentioned quite in the past, that in the introduction to Choshen Mishpat, that by the Sfardisha there was a lot more leeway from the government to paskin, and therefore if you look in, there's a few hundred years from the Maharashdam, a good 250 years where you have solid tens of Yisodisdika books on even from the Knesset Agdola going down on Choshen Mishpat. It's Knesset Agdola, Choshen Mishpat is 10 volumes in the new set, when the whole rest of the Shulchan Aruch is 14 volumes. Even HaEzer is 2 volumes, Choshen Mishpat is 10 volumes. And the Rechaim with the Hisofis and Yeridea, everything together is 14 versus Choshen Mishpat, which is 10. There's Tshuvas Sfarim from the Sfada Shel Rabbanim, which I have in the house, 2 volumes of Choshen Mishpat and 1 volume of Rechaim, Yeridea, Even HaEzer, and everything else, and Seder Aget, and everything together. Just something to keep in mind. If you look for these kinds of things, you will find it interesting. It's a historical fact that you should know. In European countries, it was not allowed to have such a thing. The Tzemach Tzedek, the only volume of the Tshuvas that was never printed in Russia, was Choshen Mishpat. It was printed only in America for the first time by the Rebbe. Anyways, so the Erech Lechem over here brings from the Rashbash that if the person saw it, it's not what does it mean that he's happy with it? If the person saw it and was not moicha, he's chayiv to pay. Why? Because it's the same thing as if he would told him clearly, go ahead and do it. Shasak is already rav. Shasak is enough. The Aruch HaShulchan says that you have to be megale das, that you have to clearly specify that you're happy with it. And if you look in the Eitzar HaMishpat, which is from today's books, you have it downstairs. Heintige Mechabrim is still alive. He writes a very interesting pilpul in one of the footnotes where he explains that there is no stira between the Erech HaShulchan and the Aruch HaShulchan. They both say the same thing. It's just that obviously that certain forms of Rav Shasak is the same thing as Gilui Das. Now, if the person cannot prove how much he spent, so the Dvar HaMishpat says that you do a shvuah kein deiraisa, and you could take what you claim that is. If you can't prove how much you spent, Dvar HaMishpat. You also have it downstairs. So this looks like very simple dinim, and a lot of dinim come out of it. So for that, we first have to understand what the yesod of these dinim is. What is the background to these dinim, and the background going back, what's the reason for each one? First of all, why is a door and a lock an obligation for everybody? For a chatzar. The Prisha brings the Rashi, the Ran, that simply you need to lock the chatzar at night because there's ganavim roaming around. So you have to lock it to make sure that there's not going to be anybody coming in and stealing. Why is a base shot an obligation for everybody? The Prisha brings from Rashi that the base shot is there needed, so you have a guard which is just going to brush away anybody that's walking down in the Shus Rabim and peeking at the inside to the chatzar, so much to prevent Hazakriya. Now, what is the siyud v'tziur that the prisha, that's how the prisha fixes the girsa, that you're not koifer? He says siyud is plastering the walls and tziur is certain designs on the walls. And these are not needed, and the minhag hamokim is not to have them. And on the next point that the Shulchan Aruch says, or the Tur brings it, that if you don't live there, you only have to pay for a door and a lock, but not for anything else. The Prisha explains, very simple, why don't you have to pay for Beis Shar? The Beis Shar is not such a need. But why is not such a need for him? That's his reason. It's not such a need. It's not a tzorech godlo kol kach. That's something else. Other people say because it has a kriya. But he points out something else. He says, not living there means that nobody is living there. That you're not living there, and nobody that's coming on your behalf, like your kids, like today people own, people buy properties for their children, and you don't rent it out to anybody else either. So, comes up from the Prisha a few interesting points. Number one, what's the purpose of the door and the lock? You shouldn't steal, right? So, today, don't forget, we went through this last year in the Choshen and this year a few times already. Chatzar bizmaneim and Chatzar bizmaneim. There's two different categories. Chatzar bizmaneim was the main place where they hung out during the day and did everything over there because there was no air conditionings. Today, we're talking about even years ago, Chatzar was no longer where it used to be. So, l'chayra, chatzar today, if it doesn't have things to be stolen from it, then it's not, it's not a tzorech to have a lock in the door over there. But if it's a backyard of a few houses together, or of a building, and over there all the kids keep their bikes and everything else, and the barbecues and everything, so that's same din, to have it locked.
Well, you can just get a lock bike.
You can't expect every person to get a lock bike, and there's a lot of things that are going to be left over there, and you can rely on your kids to get lock bikes, and you're not going to have not the lock and not the bike. Now, from the other side, now, if you have a building, and condo building, and the building has a door, and the door has to have a lock, so maybe the chatzar, nobody's stealing anything, but in the building, the door to the buildings, today is like a chatzar. A building is essentially the same as a chatzar for this purpose. So you could be koifer, one could be koifer the other people to put a door and put a lock in the building. Unless you're not Yisrael, in certain neighborhoods where you can walk into any building, there's no bichlal, you just walk in and go up the steps to the doors of the people. Depends which neighborhoods you live in. So that boils down to Pashat Minhag. It's the logic behind it is very simple. If it's something which is needed to prevent ganovim, then you have to do it. Now, what comes out of it? Something simple. If you have to put alarm systems, if you have to put cameras, all the other things that are connected today to preventing stealing are in the same responsibility as the door and the lock. So if people are together in the building, or people are together in a bungalow colony, or whatever it is, the people could be koifer the other people to have all these things which are there for shmirah, which are considered the tzorech gadol.
To what extent are you going to say that?
So, to what extent? So that is I think the Aruch HaShulchan says that today it's all talui v'firois enei adayanim because you can't really make klalim when it comes to these things. I'm talking about the Aruch HaShulchan 200 years ago, 150 years ago. Another thing, the Prisha says that tziyur is not considered a tzorech gadol, it's not considered a regular thing, it's not minhag. Today I have yet to see a building where they built walls, or they built frames, or even they built gates and they didn't paint it. So maybe tziyur is extra if you want to put fancy paintings, or you want to get an artist to make a nice lobby, that's extras, but paintings or regular things is included is normal. Painting a wall is normal today. It's minhag, it's normal, it's considered. You don't even have to get into the tzorech gadol part, because you could argue that it's tzorech gadol, because today if a metal gate which is not painted every few years, it gets rusted and it gets destroyed. But metal fence, or if you have a wall and it's not painted, the bricks today might crack or whatever it is. So it could fall into that category. Could be it's a chiyuv medina because of the minig. Depends on the place. Beis shar, the Parisha says the ikar is medina has a kriya, which means that if you have a chatzar which has a kriya of people from Rishus Harabim coming, so if you have a chatzar which is not open to Rishus Harabim, it's not open to a place where people walk, and you don't have a chashash of hezekriya, l'chayra, you don't have to do it according to the Parisha. That's the simple mashmos of the. Huh?
No one built the Beis Shai.
Yeah, to prevent hezekriya, I'm saying what it's done. Talking about now, it happens to be, but a door and a fence you have to do even if you're far from Rishus Harabim. Sometimes if places where there is no, or quieter places away from Rishus Harabim and there's no lights, as they say, street lights prevent crime because people are embarrassed to do things. Street lights and cameras prevent crime. So if you have a dark place and it's away from Rishus Harabim, there might be more incentive to come in and steal. So you have to have better protection. You can't say it if you're far from Rishus Harabim. It's that in the Erech Lechem actually says that when it comes to doors, there's no difference between you if you're samach l'Rishus Harabim or you're not samach l'Rishus Harabim. Same reason is why, if you don't live there, you're pater from a Beis Shar. Why? Because you don't have Hezekriya. Since the Nesivis, if Cotton Beis says it, based on the logic that it's all Beis Shar because it has Hezekriya, so therefore, if you don't live in there, you don't have Hezekriya, you're pater from it. Now, how many people could force other people to do it? So the Erech Lechem says, one against all and something which is a chiyuv, you could do it. The book Mishnahs the Rabbi Eliezer and Mispat doesn't say echad neged rabim. The lashon he uses is mu'atim esamerubim. Could be kaifer them. Mu'atim Mishnahs the Rabbi Eliezer, but it doesn't say mu'atim could be more. It could be one against more. So it's rabim biyad me'atim, and Chanukah means many against the few, but the few could be two. So you can have, if you want to create a machlekes between the Mishnahs of Rabbi Eliezer and Erech Lechem, you could go 2 versus 1. So, 2 according to the Mu'atim is 2, because Miut is Shnayim, and Yachid is 1. Interesting, there's a Beis Yaakov here, and it's in the blue book, the Eitzer and Farshei Shulchan Aruch, that he says, brings proofs in the Gemara, the whole Beis Shar is Mitzad Midas Chassidus. So that has a kriya, and therefore, even somebody who lives there and everything else, you can't be kosher for him to participate in the Beis Shar. Now, let's, even Bizman Nehem, even if you live there, everything. Bechal says from the Gemara, it's Bechal, he doesn't understand how it comes to it. He says he believes it as Tzarech Chiyum, but he says it makes no sense to say it, and therefore he can't be kosher.
I don't know. These days, anyone ever made Beis Shar? You ever saw Beis Shar?
Yes, the Beis Shar is there to prevent schnorrers from coming in and collecting money. That's what they make a Beis Shar for today. The same reason why you make a buzzers. So you know who to say that you're not home, or to tell your kids you're not home. Stuff like that, when people come and schnorring. Well, that's the purpose of a Beis Shar today. It's not for Hezekriya. You have in big buildings, you have fancy buildings in Manhattan, you have a doorman. He's there to collect your packages, and he's there to prevent unwanted people from coming and bothering you. Now, we mentioned about a door of a building, so we said the door of a building is a chiyuv, it's a tzerich gadol, etc. Regarding painting, plastering, it's minhag hamedina, so it also became a chiyuv. In Emek HaMishpat, he says that plastering today is considered a tzarech gadol. He also paskins something else interesting, that if there is a suffix of something is a tzarech gadol or not, the roiv is machriya. The roiv of the people in the property are machriya. But if the majority want it, but it's not a tzarech gadol, means if it's a machloikis, if it's a tzarech gadol or not, the roiv could be machriya, it's a tzarech gadol. But if it's something which is clearly not a tzarech gadol, but the majority want it, then you already can't be kaifa. Because the Roiv has the power to define that something is a tzarech gadol. The Roiv doesn't have a power to define that you're obligated to give for something which is not a tzarech gadol.
Any dining room.
You
go to a Bezdin, the Bezdin won't have...
We'll have to determine based on the minhag usually. So now what things in the building are minhag medina which is not locking the doors? Let's go to more things. Getting a super to clean the hallways and clean the steps. Yeah, that's something which is clearly everybody has to participate in. Yeah. Question becomes, how many times does it have to happen? That's a fight which can happen, because having a super coming 1 day a week to clean up everything would cost a certain amount of money. Having him come 3 days a week would cost more. And having him come 5 days a week would cost more. And some buildings you walk in where they do it once a week and it stinks for the rest of the week because people drag garbage or whatever it is, or it's sticky and everything else, depending on if you're dealing in an old age home or if you're dealing in a young with a lot of kids. So the question is, could you be koy for other people to do it? So that really falls into the category if it's a tzedach gadol or not, or if it's a minhag or not. In Eretz Yisrael, the minhag is, if you look in the books that today in Bnei Brak, the minhag is once a week. In America, the minhag is not once a week. It's more often than once a week, unless you live in a rental and the owner wants to be cheap. But usually, if they own, it could be more than once a week. So over there, if the majority decided to tzedach gadol, or if it's a minhag medina, you could be careful with everybody else. Same thing as dealing with the garden and dealing with all the other things that are there. Now, what happens? No, if the garden's already there, you have to take care of the backyard. You're not going to let it grow weeds and everything else. People play over there. There's a reason why they put it there. There's a reason you bought it into this building because it has a garden. You paid an extra $50,000 for your condo is to have a garden there. Otherwise, if you would just want to look out your window and see a brick wall, you would pay less. If you have the majority say it's a tzedach gadol, but the minhag medina is you don't need it. So let's say you have a bunch of feinschmeckers and they decided it's a tzedach gadol to have matchnik drawings in your building. But the minhag medina is you don't have to. You could buy from Walmart $10 a piece, $20 a piece today with inflation. So the Eitzer Mishpat says that if the minhag medina is nishtazoi, can't. Minhag medina doesn't mean the whole country of America. Obviously, buildings in Brooklyn are different than buildings in Manhattan, and you have to that's one of the things that at the time you take into consideration. Because it's very different. There's like houses in the Hamptons have different standards than houses in Far Rockaway. They're both on the same ocean, but it's very different. And one of them cost $500,000, and one of them cost $5 to $15 million. It's a different kind of crowd. Something which you have to install mitzad dina de malchusa is obviously that everybody has to participate. It becomes a tzedach gadol, it becomes a chiyuv. Yeah, they have to put sprinkler systems, fire escapes, all these kinds of things that have to be done. Now, what happens regarding heating? Heating in an apartment building, you all know, because you're all renting, that the heating is depending on the moods of the owners. Yeah, sometimes you have it 3 hours a day, they have it 4 hours a day, sometimes you have it 6 hours a day. Sometimes if the gas is too expensive, there was a certain landlord who I heard many years ago, and we'll call them the slumlords of Brooklyn, that when the gas crisis in the 1970s was very high, and he made a cheshbon that cheap mashke is cheaper than heating the building. So you would heat the building for 2-3 hours and put boxes of mashke in the building. The people will drink. They won't feel the cold and they're not going to complain. He made a cheshbon. It was worth it. He kept it and he saved money in such a way. Now, so the question is now, if obviously that for heating the building, to have heating, everybody could be kind for each other. You have to participate. But how many hours? Yeah, so the Eitzer Mishpat goes into the whole discussion. How many hours? Could one be kind for the other ones to have more hours, less hours? So most people in the building want less hours because they're working. There's a few batlanim who don't work and they want more hours because they want to be home the whole time. But that doesn't mean everybody has to pay for it. So he says, Eitzer Mishpat says, totally minhag medina. The minhag medina, if you look in all public places, all public buildings, it's not on the whole day. It's on 6-7 hours. It's a few hours in the morning, a few hours, and usually at night more than it goes on and off. So you go based on minhag medina, you can't be kofer. And more so, just to add to it, this is not mentioned in Eitzer Mishpat, I'm just telling you, if a yachid wants to have more heating, he could always buy a plug-in heater for the hours that he feels that he's cold. Same thing if you have if things which have to be fixed for the benefit of everybody else, like fixing the roof, which is connected a little bit later in the Siman. Fixing the roof, if it's a roof for everybody, not that it belongs, not the one person has more use than everybody else, obviously everybody has to participate, as the Shevet HaLevi writes it. There's this book called Mishkanos Yisrael, a very geschmack sefer on Hilchos Niskei Shchenim, which was written by the Rosh Hashiva of Kfar Chabad, and he has a full book just on questions of fights between neighbors, and he has a few interesting ones. We're going to go through them. I'll tell you what the Simanim are, so if you want to look at it afterwards in Eitzar HaChochma, you'll enjoy it. Siman Tezvav. We'll go through 4 or 5 now, and another 1, 2 later. Siman Tezvav. What's the din of a condo board? What's their koyach? He explains, according to halacha, the decisions of a condo board have power if they were voted in by the majority of the people of the building. The majority, the board, the condo board, or the board of the building, has the right to make a determination for every single person who's living in the building. On what? On things which are tzedach gadol, or things which are the minhag in the whole building, in the whole area, or that it's written in the condo book. That means the book of the guidelines, the book that everybody accepts when they do it.
They could decide if it's tzedach?
They could decide if it's tzedach gadol. Yeah, they were voted in to make the decision on behalf of everybody else. He says, but the guidebook needs the approval of everybody. Unless,
If they could decide if it's tzedach gadol, why do you need a guidebook?
the majority of the board is the same as the majority of the building. No, the guidebook is, every condo has a guidebook, the rules.
If the board decides...
New things, additional things are not in the book. But they could say things, they could also impose things which are in the condo book. But he says the condo book needs everybody's approval. Happens to be in New York, when you buy a condo, you're already buying with the condo book attached to it. So you're kind of based on that specific thing. So he writes over there, if you bought from after a condo book was already accepted by everybody, you bought based on that condo book, so you accepted it. They don't need your askama anymore. If you bought from somebody who already lives there, you bought under those conditions. But if they have to change something in the condo book or add something to the condo book, that needs the approval of everybody else.
What does this stem from?
What?
It's like just
The same idea of Roiv. What's Roiv? He says the Roiv voted the Vad of the building. So you don't need Roiv every time. All the things we discussed before is we need Roiv to make determinations, right? In certain sense. So he tells you the Roiv gets shrinked into a smaller Roiv because the Roiv elected to approve the book and the Roiv elected to approve the board. So the moment the Roiv voted in the board by the majority, they accepted that their majority of the board will serve as their voices. And you don't have to have the 30 or 40 or 50 people every time going for a vote and counting the votes. The only thing that the board has no right to do, aside obviously something which is not a tzedach gadol, something which is extras, is if they do something which discriminates against a specific person. Not only that, he says you could be kayf and a kodesh goyim if they don't, if the minority doesn't want to listen.
What? You could be
Kayf and Irkos. If the minority doesn't want to follow the rules of the condo board, you could go to Irkos and kayf for them. Siman Yud Zayin. In this book of Mishkanos Yisrael. I'm just giving you the interesting ones. That's the Yesodis Dika book, which if you have any issues, the first place to look is over there. If one person bought and didn't move in to live over there yet, he paskins, according to Reva Paiskim, Mashmos of Reva Paiskim, as opposed to the Chasam Sofer, that you're not chayev in the day-to-day expenses. For example, heating, cleaning, electricity, etc. He says, but according to the Chasam Sofer, you would be chayev in all the running expenses. In the Shiuri, in the Shevet HaLevi's Shiurim on these Simonim, he also, even though he usually follows the Chasam Sofer, over here paskins the same thing, that not the Chasam Sofer, you're not chayev in the day-to-day expenses, you will only be chayev in structural repairs to the building. Another thing he explains in this Siman Yud Zayin, if somebody lives on the first floor, he doesn't need the elevator. Therefore, all the expense of the elevator is not chayev. Even though, according to the condo book, everybody has to pay for those expenses divided equally. But he doesn't have to. Why? Because he has absolutely no hana from it. He also says if somebody goes and closes all the radiators in his house because he is a hot-blooded fellow and he does not need the heating in the winter, and there's no heating going into his apartment, he could get away without paying for it. But he still has to pay for the repairs of the main heating system. He doesn't have to pay for the oil or the gas that they use for the heating system because he doesn't have any hana from it. But the actual system that's part of capital improvements of the building, he has to pay for installing it, he has to pay for fixing it, he has to pay for replacing it. What does he have to pay for? A garden or the backyard or those kinds of things. Even if you're not living there, you still have to pay for it. Why? Because that's not only a hanoah that you have when you're there. The value of your apartment is attached to that. And the reason why your apartment is worth more is because of the garden. And therefore you have to pay for that, even if you're not living there yet. Masha'en kain, cleaning the hallways. And he says that even
He's part of the hallway?
if he doesn't live there, he's patur from, I guess in the beginning, he's patur from all the running expenses if he's not living there. He says, but ultimately we have the chasam sefer, and you can't just brush over the chasam sefer that says that you're chayav and everything. So he says, therefore, you have to make a pshara, and you can't just brush over the chasam sefer, and anything, basically things which, in general, anything which he might have some use from it or some benefit from it, even while he's not living there, he has to pay for, and things which clearly he has no benefit from, he doesn't have to pay for. Siman Yud Ches over there. If there's a bunch of buildings together, this is more common, not so common in Crown Heights, but common in other places. You have a bunch of buildings together, and they're all part of like a building area, and they have one condo board for all the buildings. And there are certain things that only certain buildings have benefit from. For example, there's a beautiful garden, there's something which is only behind one building, not both buildings. The other building has no access to it. He says that al pi Torah, it's asur for the building board to charge the expenses to the people who have no access to it. Even though in the condo book it says that all the expenses are shared equally. Same thing he says, if every building has its own elevators, and the elevator in building A breaks, so even though according to the condo board, the people of building B and C, all the expenses get split equally, you're not allowed to take money from the people of B and C to pay for the fixing the elevator of building A. Because they have absolutely no hana from it, and therefore, even if it's in the machusa, he says you still can't take money from him to do it. Because they have absolutely no hana from these expenses, but Mela, it's asur to take. He says, if you take money from them, shalei kadin. Siman Yud Tes over here also. I'm just going through the points, because you look at it afterwards, each shuvah is 4 or 5 pages. It's geschmack, but just giving you the pointers so you should know what the maskanas are. When they bought the building, everybody, according to the plans, they had simple steps. Basic, simple steps that look like the steps that you have in school buildings. They didn't put, there was no plans to put marble or anything fancy over there. The Vada Binyan decides, listen, it's time to upgrade our building, and we want to change the steps. It should be nice marble. We want to put marble on the sides, or rock, or whatever. In America, marble is much more expensive, but outside of America, different places, it's easier to get. And he says, every person could say, I'm not interested in paying for it. Why? Because he has no hana from it. Even though he might have hana from it, it's only for rich people. This is not the regular standard thing that was done for this. It's not something which is tzayid. However, if afterwards this guy shows that he's happy with it, doesn't mean that he's actually going up the steps. Going up the steps doesn't mean that he's gila daita, that he's happy with marble, because he would go up the steps of whether there would be marble or not. Gila daita, for whatever reason, he stated, oh, that's such a beautiful thing, now the value of my building went up, etc., etc. So he has to pay for it. Then goes the whole discussion if you have to make a mechar, or you don't have to make a mechar, etc. Siman Chof Aleph, he just goes into a topic which is not so connected to this siman, but it's more connected to later in Shutaf Sheyara, the Shalei Brashus, etc. If one person in the building does certain improvements on his own bill, He puts in swings, he plants fancy trees, he makes a garden, and then afterwards he sends a bill to the whole building. So he says every single person is potter unless it's proven that they said that they're happy with it. Or that they show that they actually use it. The kids go on to the trampoline, you know that they're happy with it. But if the minhag is to do so, or it's something which is needed, gadol, then they have to pay regardless. Why? Because ultimately they're shutfim and they have hanoef, they could have hanoef from it. Now, just a general thing to all these hanoef things, if a person's value of his house went up significantly, or even not so significantly, because of all these improvements, when the house gets sold, the building could come and charge for that improvement, because they'll say, yes, you were not interested in having it, but the buyer who just bought your house is paying you $900,000 instead of $750,000 because this place has a beautiful backyard and it has nice lighting and it has a nice walking path in the back. And it's marble, and when you walk in, there's nice mirrors. And yes, you were stingy, you didn't want to pay, but now you're benefiting from it, so you pay. They throw on him the cheshbon at that point. Like I mentioned, the Aruch HaShulchan in Sif Bey says all the chiyuvim are all totally for reis and ebezin. So the reason why I'm telling you all these mekayres is because reis and ebezin, you might end up in that position. Okay, Sif Gimel. It says when you collect, when you goive. You goive kefi lefi momoin, according to momoin, and not according to kiruv abatim. That's the first opinion. We'll soon explain what exactly that means. But only in this, what's lefi momoin means whoever is richer pays more, whoever is poorer pays less. But not according to kiruv abatim, how close you are to the entrance. But in this city, you are goive for the wall around the city, according to kiruv abatim. That's in Kuf Samach Gimel, Sif Gimel. Yeah, and over here it's in Sif Gimel, it's about abatim that's different from Meir. And Yesh Mishaymer, that Chatzer and Bnei Eir is the same. You always collect according to whoever's closer to the entrance gets more. What is the logic behind this disagreement between the two opinions? The Prisha explains the reason why by a city, by a chatzar, you don't do this lefi kiruv abatim according to the first opinion is pashut simply in a chatzar there's no karev v'rachik. It's all one chatzar. He writes the same thing in the Smeh over here. The Prisha is the Smeh. That being that the chatzar is small, it's considered like one big house, and that's it. Even though, according to some logic, you would think that someone who's closer to the door, to the outside, needs more shmira, but soon we're going to see why it's not so. But by a city, you do have rachik v'karev, you do have somebody who's closer to the entrance, someone who's further to the entrance, because it's pushed a bigger area. And the Smeh says, this is not like the Lavush. The Lavush says that it's that by a city, it's a shmira la'adam, it's a shmira for the person, that you shouldn't get killed, and therefore wherever you're closer, there's more of a chance of getting killed from the armies conquering. And in the chatzar, it's shmira only for chafotzim, so therefore it's all equal. And therefore, it means that's the shid of the lavush, and therefore, why would you be goyva lefi mammon? Simply because by a chatzar, somebody who has more mammon has more things to steal. The ganavim are going to walk around to see the people who have more things to steal, they'll steal more from them. Yeah, that is and in the city, what's the shmira la'adam? Bash b'koach nefesh. And the Chasam Sofer over here on the Smeh disagrees on the Smeh and says the Lavush is right. And he says, very simple. By a chatzar, it's a small crowd of people. You have 10 people, you have 20 people. Let's say that the Ganavim get in and they steal a few things and they're still roaming around stealing. Come in, the whole building gangs up on them, beats them up, gets the stuff back from them, throws them off, and that's it. Now, even whether the person is living the first door house or he's living all the way inside, they'll all get their stuff back because he caught the Ganavim. If the Ganavim will overpower the people in the building. So everybody's going to lose, whether you're close or whether you're far. They're going to empty out the whole building. So there's no difference whether you're close or you're far. Sefer explains this. Who?
We're not talking about straight, we're not talking about like someone who's going to kill you, just trying to rob your money.
Good, so that's what I'm saying. You could get everything back from them. But in a city, he says, if the people of the city are going to ultimately repel the attack, yes, they will be able to chase the army out of town. But the people who got killed will never come back to life. So therefore, the shmira for the people who are closer to the door is a much stronger shmira. There's no chance of mechayim mesim when you are in a city. The Aruch HaShulchan explains the way the Aruch HaShulchan paints it in a very interesting way, which Pasha turns this machlekes in the mechaber to machlekes b'metzias, and what is the mentality of Ganavim? That means it's not a machlekes lahalacha; it's a machlekes mentality. Yeah, he says, according to the first opinion, the Ganavim, if they make it into the chatzar, they'll rob everybody. That's how they look at it. They're not going to start looking. They'll decide which houses they'll rob, irrelevant of whether they're closer to the entrance or not. That's shitta. The first shitta is that's how they view Ganavim.
Not straight, we're not talking about city.
Huh?
Talking about
Back to the chatzar. Yeah, we're in the chatzar. And therefore, somebody has more things to steal, has to pay more, because he has more hana from the gate, from the fence. But according to the second opinion, the Ganavim walk in and they run around and they steal whatever they could get their hands on faster. So whoever's closer has to pay more. So it's pashut machlekes about how to look at the Ganav. But for that, the question is, I personally don't know. I never interviewed them, so I can't tell you which way they are. But I'm sure there's both categories. Now, the Nesivist comes to a whole discussion over here. We'll go aside about this base shot. Is the base shot included in it or not? It's a machloikas. According to the Nesivist, the base shot is also included in this machloikas, whether you give lefi mamoin or lefi kiruv habat. And even though it's only mitzad hezekri, and we know from previous סימן Kufnun Zayin, Kufnun Daled, I think, that everybody gives equally for hezekri, because he says it's different. In Kufnun Zayin, the reason why everybody gives equally for hezekri is because each person is a mazik equally. Therefore, each person pays equal, whether you have a bigger chatzar or a smaller chatzar. Over here, the hezekri is not from the people inside the chatzar. The hezekri is from the people outside the chatzar. The people outside the chatzar, whether you hold it a few moments, because the person has more stuff, more things going on, he has more hezek, you have more to damage, or mitzad hezekri, or mitzad, whoever's closer to the gate, has more people peeking in. So he also has to be the fikir of batim. But it's still, even though it's not hezekri, you still have to pay it. Yeshushanas Yaakov over here goes at length, disagrees with the Nesivus, and says base shar is not part of this discussion. This argument of lefi kiruv batim or lefi momon is completely irrelevant to the discussion of base shar. It's only a discussion about things that are relevant to shmira. Shmira from Ganavim, shmira from Hezekias. Not shmira from Hezekiah. It's pashut for the Ganavim. So what is discussed over here about how much you have to pay a fikir of batim or the fimomen for is only about a delas and a manu. In Shevet Alevi is machriya like the smeh, and he says, but bizman hazeh everybody pays shave b'shave, whether it's delis, whether it's manul. If you go into the book Vayelaket Yosef, which is a sefer from Morocco from 150 years ago, he also says aminog achshav litem b'shave, that you give equally for the door and for the things. Forget about the kiruv mamin or kiruv batim. The minhag is ready to give everything equally. In Mishkanes Yisrael, which I mentioned before, Siman Zayin goes into a side discussion which is connected to this. How do you calculate expenses in a shared building? One person has a big apartment, with many rooms. One person has a small apartment. Do you divide the expenses based on how much square feet each person has, or do you divide expenses based on owners, how many units there are? And he says, depends which kind of expenses. Some expenses like heating, fixing the heating system, that goes based on square footage. Why? Because according to the Nesivis that you measure based on the amount of hanoah, which he discusses regarding Hazakriya, based on that comes out that for heating also, if you have a bigger house, you use more heating, you have more hanoah, you have to pay more. But cleaning the building, or fixing, or taking care of the backyards, or taking care of the garden, or the lights in the building, that's all equal, because everybody has the same hanoah from it. That's something. We'll get to the more kids as a separate discussion, which a piece svare should go based on people. And the Eitzer Mishpat says that doesn't make sense that every time somebody in the building will have a kid, you'll start recalculating everybody. So therefore, we don't go based on that. Even though a piece svare should do it. Anyways, we'll get to the Eitzer Mishpat soon. But so the Mishkan Yisrael says no. For these kinds of hanoahs, you take from each person equally. And even if according to law, or according to the condo book, that's how you do it. All expenses are divided according to square footage. It's against halacha, because certain things cannot be divided according to square footage. If the hanoah is equal, it doesn't make sense that one person who has a bigger house should pay more. Some things are calculated according to the amount of owners. Some things are calculated according to the square footage. But he says there's some things which are based upon the amount of people in each unit. And that is fixing the elevator and fixing the sewers. That you calculate you divide it based on how many people are in each unit. That means you take all the people living in the building and you divide it between them.
So there's three things. There's chimum that's pointed to...
Things which are heating, that would go based on the size. According to Mishkan Yisrael. Heating is based on size. Cleaning, lights in the building, gardening, and those things are according to per unit, not according to size. And elevator, sewer, these kinds of things which are based on specific damages, there's more usage, then that goes based on the amount of people using it. The Eitzer Mishpat takes a little bit of a different approach. And he says, when it comes to heating, so there's one svara to say it goes based on square footage. There's one svara to say that it goes based on the amount of rooms. And there's one svara to say that you go based on the amount of people, right? And he says a fourth svara from Emek HaMishpat, maybe you go according to the amount of radiators that you have in the house. The heatings, each radiator, the steam systems. You count the radiators. If you go based on that shitta, now you're going to have a much bigger problem because each radiator is a different size. You're going to start measuring how big each radiator is. You're going to never finish with that. His maskana is you go either according to the size, the square footage, or according to the radiators, but not according to the people, not according to the amount of rooms. When it comes to electricity that's used in the hallways and all these things, he also says there's a svara that it should be according to the amount of people in each unit. There's a svara that it should be according to the amount of units. And he says the maskana doesn't make sense, like I told you before, that you should every time someone has a baby, you recalculate the whole building, or somebody dies, or whatever it is. So therefore, you fall based on families. Regarding elevators, he paskins like similar to Mishkan Yisrael. It goes based on, different than Mishkan Yisrael. It does not go based on people, it goes based on families. Based on units. He says, except for the person living on the first floor. Person living on the first floor is completely potter. But anybody else living on the other floors, they're all chayav equally. You're not going to start calculating if the person on the second floor is using it for 20 seconds and the person on the third floor is using it for 30 seconds. So it's that you don't go into. But the first person on the first floor walks right into his house, never has to use elevators, so he doesn't have to pay for it. If somebody lives on the sixth floor and says, I'm not using the elevator, I go up and down the steps all the time, I keep myself healthy. He can't say, and there's already an elevator in the building, the Mishpat says he can't say I'm not paying for it, for fixing it or paying for fixing it. Why? It's a tzedach gadol in such a building, and therefore he cannot say I'm not participating in fixing it. But if it was not installed yet, it's an old building and you want to put a new elevator in, then people could say this is not a tzedach gadol. Because up until now we didn't have it. Now you want to put it in, it's a luxury, it's not a necessity. If it's in there when you bought, it's part of the building, tzedach gadol. If it's not there, it's a luxury, not a necessity. If it's a luxury and not a necessity, a person could refuse to participate in it unless it's part of law, or if it's a minhag that every building with the law establishes that every building has to have an elevator, which doesn't exist yet. Regarding fixing the building, capital improvements to the building, he says that those capital improvements, the Mishpat says, they get divided based on the amount of people, based on the square footage. Why? Because capital improvements to the building, fixing the outside, the inside, these kinds of things, whoever has a bigger unit is selling it for more. His value of his unit is growing based on how good the building is taken care of, and therefore the percentages are based on how much you own. Happens to be in New York, according to the condo laws, you could choose one or the other. You could either choose to go for everything based on square footage, or for everything based on the amount of people. Almost every condo, all condos today follow pretty much to go based on square footage. And I already told you, Mishnah Yisrael says, even when it goes based on footage, you have to be careful not to violate Shulchan Aruch when you do it. Now, obviously, the Emek HaMishpat presents something which is common sense, even though we say that when it comes to cleaning, everybody participates equally in it, and this is, we saw it signed in Shevet HaLevi, Emek HaMishpat, Mishkan Yisrael, everybody. It's obvious that if somebody goes and messes up the place intentionally, that he has to pay for the whole thing himself, and don't come and say that his Pashutif has to participate, all have to participate in the mess that one person made. Sif Dalet, if somebody does not want to participate in whatever he has to fix, and he's not ready to rent out his unit to be able to pay for it, the rest of the people could do whatever repairs are needed, whether it's the base shah, the delis, the manul, not the base shah, the machlekas if we need to or not, and they could take his apartment, his unit by force, rent it out, take all the rent that comes in until he pays the debt. The Nesiva says, if you can't rent it out, nobody wants to rent this apartment, you take it away from him, you force him to sell it, or you take by force his property and sell it to be able to pay it. Just like in the end of Sim and Kuf Nun Hey, when he tell a person who can't afford to put up a gate, G'doir oy mechoir, put a gate or sell. That's what the Nesivos in Chidushim Sif Daled writes. The Emek HaMishpat adds, obviously, this is not you need a Reshus Bezdin to be koifer. You can't just have that the condo board will just walk around and be koifer for these kinds of things. Before we're talking about other regular expenses, is one the Mishkan Yisrael says you go straight to the cause. The Emek HaMishpat disagrees and says no, you need to have Reshus Bezdin.
Only by this.
Only
by this.
Yeah. Now, the Aruch HaShulchan says that Aruch HaShulchan says it's a chayv ragil. It's a regular chayv. Regular chayv, it doesn't say whether you could be yored l'chasav, koif and limker v'kayitza b'zeh, and he doesn't go into that discussion. It's mashma that he leaves it open. The shiurim of the Shevet HaLevi clearly states that he says it's tzarich chiyun that the nesivus is svare, and it's quite clear that you can't go yored l'chasav for such a chayv. It's a chayv, it remains a chayv on him until he pays him.
Renting is not considered Yadul Hasa?
No. No. Renting it out just for the month or two to pay for it, it's not the same as selling it or going and taking something that belongs to him and selling it. Renting for a month, for 2, for 3, whatever it is. Shoshanas Yaakov is a long, about 4 pages long. No, not Shoshanas Yaakov, I mixed up. The Shoshanas Yaakov just says a small thing, and the Pamanizov goes at length. The Shoshanas Yaakov in Sifkat and Aleph says, obviously, this is only talking about Delis and Manu, not Beis Shar. That that we already wrote before, that all the chiyuvim that you're koifa is only things which are needed for shmira, and Beis Shah is not needed for shmira, so therefore you can't be koifa such a thing. Pamay Azov goes into a whole long discussion over here, a very interesting discussion, where he goes that he says he saw a sefer which says that what does it mean that you take this, you rent his apartment, you take away his apartment, you rent it out, and you use the money until the owner comes up with the cash. And he goes to about 3 pages long to say it makes absolutely no sense. Obviously you only rent it out and you take the money to pay, from the rent you pay the money that is to cover the expenses, because even if you take 1 penny more than that, it's already ribus, and it's a ribus gemura. Mishkanos Yisrael, this is more at length, I just give you a summary of it. If you want to look at it, you can look at it. The Mishkanos Yisrael, Siman Chavches, goes into a discussion, somebody who didn't live in the building for a while. And during that time, the condo board decided they want to make repairs. Different repairs. He wasn't there, he never paid for it. Now he comes back, and he says, you never billed me when I was here, when I was gone. Now you're tacking on me a bill for 3 years of repairs, I don't want to pay. So the condo board asked whether they're allowed to not let him use it. Freeze him out, can't use the garden, shut off his heat, can't use the elevator, etc. And the Mishnah says yes. If it's something which is a tzedach gadol, you could freeze all these services from him until he pays. Why? Because if he would have been there, he would have been chayiv. Ba'atzim, he would have been chayiv even before. Because these are tzedach gadol, the repairs or installations, which are not steady uses like not charging him for gas or for these kinds of things. They're charging him for capital improvements. For capital improvements, it's a chayv that fell on him the moment the capital improvements are made. Therefore, since it fell on him the moment the capital improvements are made, now they could come and they could charge it from him. And he says, and it's not midas doim, even though by now it's zenan of zelachasa, because they're not losing anything, they already paid for it. Still, it's not considered midas doim because the shutav became a chayv on him.
Take a lock out of the house or just not use?
You can lock him out of the services. Can't lock him out of the house. See if one of the shutfim wants to put something in the chatzar, something which is not usual to do in the chatzar, you could be ma'akev him from doing it. Now, we discussed a lot of it in Siman Kuf Nun Vov, so I'm not going to go into it at length. I just want to point out a few nekudas. Number one, by the Tur, the lashon is the lashon of kavua, and the bach is medayik. From there's dafke, only davar kavua you're not allowed to do, but davar ara you're allowed to. The Ulam HaMishpat, also in the blue book, the blue Likud Mefasheh Shulchan Aruch, holds like the Bach, and says that, and he explains that the Rambam also holds that ara is mutter if you want to put chickens there temporarily. The Mata Shimain says no, it's asur even arai, and he says that's mashma it's mashma like that also from the Rambam. What's enough community between the Mata Shimain and the Ulam HaMishpat? Could you make kaparas in your backyard? Is it arai? Is it asur or not? It's not minhag to have a chicken farm in the backyard of a building.
Well, I think they make a chicken coop. Not building anything, just have a bunch of chickens.
The question is if it's davar arogel or not.
Well, according to the Bach.
If it's arai, according to Bach, arai is mutter.
Yeah, I'm saying you're not building anything, just have a bunch of
According to Bach, l'chayr is mutter, yeah.
chickens. Even if it's there for 3 years.
Huh?
Even if it's there for 3 years.
Yeah, l'chayr according to Bach is mutter, yeah. If he wants, now the Mata Shimon, another interesting thing he points out in Sifkat Nevav, he says if you want to put, let's say, laundry, you want to hang up laundry to dry, in a corner of the yard that nobody ever uses, it's an abandoned corner over there, nobody could stop you from doing it. Even though the Kvisa is discussed over in Sifhei, and you can do it. He says if it's using a side corner where nobody uses, or you put something over there, you're sticking something in a place nobody uses, that's mutter. The Oitzer HaMishpat says, adds to all this, he says, if the minhag hamokim is to do these kinds of things in the backyard, you're allowed to do it. So if Vav, and with that we'll conclude today. 5 chatzeres which all pour water into the same sewer line, and it got ruined. So it depends where it got stuck, where the clog is. If the clog is in the bottom of the sewer line, by the 5th house, the one all the way in the bottom, everybody pays for it equally. If the clog is only in the top one, only the top one pays for it. Makes sense. If it's in the middle, whoever is from that point upwards pays for it, whoever is in the bottom doesn't have to participate in it. What's the reason why everybody has to participate in it? Very simple, because if they're not going to unclog it by the bottom, the water is going to go up and up and up and up and up and up and mess it up for everybody all the way to the top. So everybody's responsible to participate in it. But
It's not going to go up, it's going to drip in the top.
huh?
Why would it go up? It'll just drip in the top.
No, it's a canal. So if it doesn't go into here, the canal will pile up all the way back. Will fill up. It's not going to have anywhere to go. But if it stops and if it's only clogged at the top, it's not going to affect the people on the bottom because still continue. That's what that Tzma explains it. Pamoine Zov explains the Pashtos Lashon HaMechaber is that everybody who participates participate shave b'shave in whatever has to be fixed. And there's no difference whether it is to clean the sewer, to fix the sewer, to repair the sewer, or to build a new sewer. In all these things, if it's for everybody, everybody pays. If it's only for the top part pays. If it's only for 3 units pay for it. He adds, if you have a sewer line for 5 houses, and then a 6th house builds north of the sewer line, and he wants to attach himself to the sewer line, it's not enough that he should just build his little piece. He has to pay all the other 5 participation in what they built, because now he's joining into their line. Otherwise, he would have to build his whole line all the way, independent line all the way down. He says there is over here goes also at length, a few pages, and he explains that there is somebody who holds that there's a difference between repairing everybody pays equally, but building is each person is a different cheshbonos. Lav dafka that the person at the bottom has to pay the same as the person at the top. And he takes the whole thing apart, and the maskana, he says like the mechaber. Now,
So he says like the Mechaber
that everybody pays equally, and he says like the mechaber, the mashmos, the mechaber, everybody pays equally. In the Shiurei Shevet HaLevi on this סימן, it's a thin book you have downstairs. It's not called Shiurei Shevet HaLevi, it's called Dinei Shchenim. It's a thin blue book, Kuf Samach Aleph, Kuf Samach Gimel. He says, if it's only a sewer clogged, that means a sewer line clogged, not that it's damaged, a sewer line clogged, so only the people from the sewer clog upwards pay for it. Because those are the only ones that are getting affected from it. And because they're the ones that caused it, obviously. If a person is on the 2nd floor and there's a sewer clog on the 5th floor, it's obviously that the guy on the 2nd floor didn't do it. But it must be either the 5th floor or the 6th floor somebody did it, so they have to pay for it. But repairing it, he says that even though, according to the Shulchan Aruch, it's mashma that repairs for the lines also go from whichever floor going upwards, he says, today the minhag is that repairs, these kinds of repairs, everybody pays equally. When you have to repair a sewer line in the building, even though, let's say the crack is on the 5th floor, everybody pays for it equally. And he says, and if the people in this building or in the people in the city have a minhag that all sewer, whether it's clogs or it's repairs, or everybody pays the same. But he says when it comes to capital repairs, it already became the minhag that all capital repairs are shared equally between all the parties. Now, the Aruch HaShulchan in Sivav also writes that when it comes to repairs, being that the whole street is going to get ruined from the repairs, so everybody pays equally whether it cracked on the top, whether it cracked on the end of the street. Even though Shulchan Aruch says Eliyona, you pay more. If it's Eliyona, only Eliyona pays. Tachtoina, everybody pays. He says no. In today's day, talking about in those days, everybody pays to it. Everybody pays to it together. The Emek HaMishpat gives a different outlook to this whole thing, and he says, Pashut, you have to understand the Metzias, what they were talking about, and what the Metzias today is. He says, Shulchan Aruch is talking about that the sewer line is hefker. It doesn't belong to anybody. The sewer line was outside the properties, so therefore, nobody's really responsible. Someone says, listen, I don't have to repair, I'm not a shutef in the whole sewer line. But the only time I have to repair is when it affects me. But he says, but today, the sewer lines belong to the shutef. It's just like the building belongs to everybody together. The sewer lines in the building belongs to everybody together. You all shoot from the same sewer line. So therefore, if you all shoot from in the same sewer line, you always have to pay everything equally together. Whether you're in the 6th floor, whether it's broken on the 5th floor, the 4th floor, whatever it is, Noitzar Mishpat is machriya the same way. He says the only exception to this rule is, because he says it's totally shut for me, you don't have to look. Shulchan Aruch is talking about when it's hefker, he's talking about shut for me. He says the only exception is when it happened in your own house. If your own line is clogged in your own house, there's absolutely no sweat to say that the whole building is responsible to pay for it. And with this we conclude Siman Kuf Samach Aleph. What?
But then people on top of you have to pay. If it happens in your house, people on top of you have to pay?
No.